Hello, today is May 28th, 2009. We're meeting today with Mr. Warren Wilt in Loveland, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Veterans History Project. Welcome, Warren, and thanks for sitting down to tell your story today.
Well, thank you.
Let's start out, if we could. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you were born.
Well, November the 5th, 1922, and of course I lost my mother when I was 2.5, and from there on,
Where were you born, Warren?
in Kansas, or in close to our area where we live now, and would be north of us, so about 4 or 5 miles, something like that.
Were you born in town or out on the farm? Or?
Out on the farm.
Yeah. What was the nearest town to you?
Be Plevna.
Well, I'm sorry?
Plevna.
Plevna?
Yeah, Plevna and Abbeville are pretty close, and so I think the address was Plevna at that time. So.
And you lost your mom at age 2, you said?
About 2.5.
2.5.
So then, from there, my aunt took me up to Washington State, and was there until time put me to school, and so I was sent home back to this area, and then we got shuffled around because of the Depression. Everybody lost everything, or well, not everything, but so then we were kind of shuffled around, and of course I've had from there. I was 1 year in Kansas, another year out at Aurora, that's part of Denver, and staying with grandmother. And from there, I started moving back towards eastern Colorado and Kansas, where several schools there, and one particular was when I was going to school where Lynn Cunningham burnt the school down, and then they rebuilt another one. And so, of course, I wasn't a runner. I always had to walk to school, but I never run like he did. But anyway, been back to around Hutchinson, Kansas, and that area, and several schools there, and finally I wind up with about a school to every grade in high school.
Oh boy.
And then it finally came along. There was 2 drafts for the Army ahead of me, and the third one was coming up. So I said, well, I'm going to volunteer for this one. And
So war broken out, or was this a pre-war
yes,
draft?
it's already. And,
Do you remember where you were and what you were thinking when you heard that Pearl Harbor had been bombed?
I think I was at Nickerson when that happened, and so that by that time, everybody in that area were trying to get a good place in the Army or something and sign up, and so I volunteered, and the church there, when I volunteered to go, I was signed up for December of '42, and didn't have to go until January the 12th of '43. And the church there gave me that little pamphlet that I now have. And so right away they shipped me down to Miami Beach for basic training.
Now, what did you end up enlisting in?
I was just going up for the Army, and I thought I'd be in an infantry, but I wound up in the Air Corps.
Now, how did you come to choose the Army over the other service branches?
Really, I didn't choose. They did it
Oh,
for
okay.
me.
Oh, okay. All right.
I don't quite understand whether they needed people in the Air Corps, or because the infantry needed them. It was worse than the Air Corps, I think, because they weren't. It was hard to get into a flight school at that time, but that. So as soon as basic training was over, we went to the Air Transport Command in Las Vegas, New Mexico. So that's when I got tired of hearing lectures and this sort of thing, and I won't get into the lectures that they put out at that time. But I thought, well, it'd be better if I go down and volunteer for the MPs. It has something to do and something to kind of be training, and it worked out pretty good until I decided that, well, I saw a brochure, join the Airborne, $50 more. And at that time, $50 is, well, when you're only getting, what, $22.50 or something.
Wow.
And then I told the captain, I said, I want to join the Airborne. And he said, well, you got to take a physical. So when I come back, well, he says, how come I get some good guys in here and then they want to get out? So, but then it was 6 days of delay, and when I come through where Charlyne lives.
Now, Charlyne's your wife?
Yeah.
And you had been dating prior to?
Just a little bit.
Okay.
So I stopped, and so I'd been there before I went in, and her mother says, "Oh no, not him again." and so that was kind of a joke to bring up to her every once in a while. But we always got along good. I mean, no problem.
Yeah.
So from there, I went down to Fort Benning, Georgia, and right away you're started into physical conditioning, and you're there. It was kind of hot in the summertime in July, and you had to have some extra training, physical training. They did that every day, and you go in with at noon, your clothes would be wet, so you'd run for the shower, and pull your boots off, shoes off, and rinse your clothes and take a shower at the same time, and put some dry ones on, and this went on practically every day that you were down there and doing physical conditioning. And then it comes to the last 4 weeks of it. Why, then you had a week of learning how to parachute and some different things. It's in stages, 4 stages, and then the last one was where you make 5 jumps. And of course you're on the towers in 1 week, and they were just, I don't remember exactly how the training went, but anyway, that's where.
It was an incredibly hard program, from what I understand. One
Right,
to get
yeah.
into and one to survive and actually pass.
Well, they were doing everything. If you scratched or you looked the wrong way or you weren't listening, why, 25 push-ups was kind of a minimum. And which, coming from the farm, why, you were used to hard work, and so it really didn't bother me. And the punishment you took verbally is, well, they probably don't do that now, but it worked on you a little bit. And of course you weren't about to bow out, because you could prove to them you could do it. And when it comes to jumping out of the plane, that was not a problem.
Had you flown prior to that?
No, these were all one-way trips. You jump out, and on my second jump, I had it all figured out how I didn't have to tumble. I didn't have to get down in that dirt. They taught you to tumble when you, like platform landings. Well, when the second one come up, I had this all figured out. I pulled out on my risers pretty close, and just real hard. I come standing up, and I'm kind of in a bent situation, looking around a little bit, and I look over there, and there's a lieutenant watching. So I go ahead and tumble, and he started laughing. He, "You sucker." But anyway, they had no problems with that, with jumping. And then when you got through, well, you had a furlough, come home. And there again, I don't know what Mom said that time. but but anyway, we from there, why we went on maneuvers in Camp McCall, and then after that, why we started in December of moving to, we went to Fort Meade, Maryland. So
Now, at this point, were you already in a unit?
we didn't go as a unit.
Or-
They just
or-
pulled us out.
Oh, okay, so you weren't in any particular unit at this point?
Right.
Okay.
After, yeah, they said, well, you're going to go through the 541st and be a combat unit. Well, you could kind of see that it wasn't working out too good, but I think because they didn't have, well, something about the officers' training or something, that it just wasn't clicking right.
But at this point, but you were considered,
unit.
you were in the 82nd at this point, though?
No,
or
not
even
really.
that? Okay,
Right.
okay.
This is just a training unit.
Oh, okay, okay.
Well, later on, after I left, why, it's just continued to be in a training unit, and then what was left, they went ships in the South Pacific and were divided up, and the 541st disbanded. And, but we went on up to what, I don't think there was not any more than 100 of us in our group. And we went through Fort G, Maryland, and through New York, and on a ship. And the sea was a little rough.
Yeah, I always have to ask this question. Here's a farm boy from Kansas. Talk a little bit about that. Did you get your sea legs? How did that? Talk about that crossing.
The crossing was kind of mean, but to keep from getting sick, I ate crackers and stayed away from the head. And so I made it all right, and we landed at port at Belfast, Ireland, and then you can cut out some of this, but we were there about maybe a week, and we decided that you wouldn't get a pass, so we just go out anyway. And if the MPs caught you, well, they'd send you back, but you needed a drink of beer, and so here's this old dark beer, and I'd wake up with a headache the next morning, and go back the next night, sneak out, drink another glass of that, and do the same thing. And I was kind of a slow learner. It took 3 nights, 3 mornings to say that's enough for me, and so kind of a learning lesson. So then they shipped us up to Port Stewart in Northern Ireland, and then from there over later, a week or so later, why we went over to Nottingham through Scotland, and I was just maybe about 2 weeks behind the main 508 regiment, and I joined the 508 in Nottingham, and that was part of the Sherwood Force area, the Robin Hood area.
Uh-huh.
So from there, why we had 2 night trainings, jumps, and just for training, map reading, compass readings at night, and so finally, along towards the latter part, we said that's enough of that, and so the fellows that were with me, we decided, hey, we're going to sleep in the haystack. Come in the next morning. Okay. Sergeant's out there greeting us, and he says, where were you? He said, well, we got lost. Yeah. Well, anyway, from there, we started taking some intensive training and map reading and stuff and when it got to be about 3 weeks before we used to go to the hangar, everybody's going out, no pass. So the captain come down, he met us the next morning, roll call, and he says, now, I don't want to see any of you get caught. Now this is his words. And so we were careful, and he says, I know you're going out. So then one morning was looking down there in the roll call, and here's Captain. He's got his pants torn. Well, at our camp they had about a 7-mile line of rocks, stone wall, and they had kind of rough on the top. And so we figured, well, their billet was right next to the wall, and it's pretty easy to go over. And just take it for granted that he had a place to go too. But then it got down to about 5 days before D-Day, why we went to the hangar, and they had it all fixed, so we was sleeping, the whole regiment was sleeping in one hangar.
Had they told you up to this point what you guys were going to be doing? I mean, did you have any idea what
Well,
the assignment was?
Yes,
or
yes, they were. We had maps of Normandy, and we were told what we were supposed to be doing, where we was at, what. Well, a lot of this pilots are probably green too, and you're putting on all this equipment. You're taking your armament, your bandoliers, or your C2s, rations, and of course you kind of place it around, tied it on your legs and this and that to help brace, and which you mount it to about at least a minimum of 125 pounds extra.
boy, I mean, how much did you weigh at that point?
Hey, get the, oh, they were right at going to the airport and lining up in there would be out. And okay, did you, or you start?
Yeah.
So when we're all out at the airport, why, there's days we would watch some movies on the hangar, and of course it's all old stuff.
You guys were all sequestered at this point?
Yeah, well, the hangar was just full of bed cots.
Uh-huh.
That's the way each company was lined up in the order. And I suppose this was due for the easy way to get out and get to the airplane. That way we had it lined. And the picture in there of us drinking coffee was, I don't know, either probably about the 4th or 5th of June, and might have been the 5th, I'm not real sure. But we had coffee and donuts, and that night then on the 5th, we were taken out to the airplane with our equipment, and we were already dressed. We had it there with our cot and walked out. Lined up, this has been about 11 o'clock before when we got on the plane, and of course when you talking about all those planes, you got, there was 2,055 of us in our so we're all getting our stuff together. When it came time to get into the plane, you always had to have somebody pushing you up, because those steps are pretty long in between.
Coupled with all that weight you had on. I meant to ask you, you said you were carrying 125 pounds of weight. I mean, how much did you weigh at that time?
I weighed 204.
204? I mean, that's almost half your weight you're carrying.
Yeah, and in fixing your equipment on, on your boot, you had your bayonets. Most of the time, most of them had it there tied to give your ankle a little brace, and then your shovel on the other one, and it kind of gave you a little support, because when you're jumping. So we're on the plane from probably about 11 to 1:30 or something like that. We're going down over across the Guernsey Island and making a dog leg around and coming. And
Were you able to, in a position where you could look out at the airplane at all?
you could look out, but there's several of the guys just with all that stuff on you. You got your extra reserve, you got your musette bag, and you got gas mask, and you got your grenades, extra armament, your rifle carrying that, and your food. And it's you wonder sometimes how you could get it all. And some of the bandoliers you could always put that way underneath your jacket, and it wouldn't be bothered because it's hanging there and to stay put. And when it come time, just before it come time to stand up, why here's a red streak going through the fuselage, and to myself I thought, well, that ought to wake those guys up down there to sleep. Mind you, they was relaxed, and everybody know what they kind of like a routine, really. But after making 2 night jumps in England, why you're pretty well used to the night jumps. And of course, we knew it was a little different. And
What's going through your mind as you're flying over? I mean, that you know you're going into battle, and I mean, what were you? Do you remember what you were thinking? How you're feeling?
No, I think a lot of them are conscious of what they got to do, what they got to get up when they get up off that plane or seat, and hook up. You gotta and you got to be prepared because some of the planes got knocked out of the air. And I don't remember whether I was thinking about anything, but I do know that I was looking back, and there's a couple on the other side that were asleep, and you couldn't. I mean, it's normal, but you're not. I don't know what they were all thinking about. It'd be kind of hard to really say.
Yeah, yeah.
But you got to be conscious of when it comes times to stand up, hook up, and when the guy that was with me in front of me was so short that when they hollered, give you the order to stand up, why the plane tilted a little bit, and he sat back down, so I immediately hook up, grabbed him, brought him up, he got hooked up, and then when it come time to go, why, you just ride him out. And of course Lee and I were almost close enough that we could whisper, and we have they give you a little cricket too, but when I don't know whether anybody used it or not, but when you give the cricket sign, it's kind of like a bolt action, back and forth. And so they were kind of leery about using it. And you use the password. Don't ask me what the password was.
Yeah. Do you remember when you first jumped out? Do you remember the sight at all as you were going?
No, I was really concentrating on the position, because if you get tangled up.
You had an issue with your rifle too, right? As far as getting your rifle in the right position?
You got to bring that rifle up to your cheek. When you get out, you got to bring it back down. So it's just something that you had to concentrate on. And then it doesn't take but about 6 seconds, and I don't think the pilot cut the flap blast back in, and it all worked out because it opened, and immediately before I even oscillated halfway, I was on the ground.
Is that right? Wow.
And when you're back at the tail end of the stick, why, the plane's going down a little bit. If they cut the prop, if they don't, well, then you're going to take a pretty good blast on you. And it did sound like a shotgun going off when that thing opened up. And from there on, you're on the ground and you're trying to get oriented and
But
how do
the
you
but
do
the
it?
unit was scattered now at this point. You
Right.
weren't at your landing designated landing spot.
You know, that I wasn't close, probably a mile from where I was supposed to be, on the wrong side of the river, but really, but when you get on the ground, you try to get organized with as many people as you can, and we were lucky enough to have about 8 before daylight, and first thing you know, we was working kind of with a platoon and taking care of everything that needed to be, and yeah, it's kind of sad to say, but that's the way it had to be.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And at that point, did you get your orientation and start heading towards your designated place, or where did?
yeah, well, it was just, we were too far off, so somebody else had to take care of it, which, and we had several guys in the water, and they flooded that area, and they left the dike open, it backs up, and then several of them were a couple days away. When we had one fellow that says, I thought I was going to have to fight the war myself, because he was so far away and he didn't know where anybody was at, and had to work his way back. And so, but then you kind of set up as try to work with a unit, or many as you had, and the group that I showed you there is, that's what we was working with for the latter part of the time I was there. When, I don't remember the day, but we had a mail call. And it had to be about the time Roosevelt got sick. So, let's see, he died, I think, the 12th of July.
12th of March in '45.
This would have been Theodore Roosevelt with the 90th Division.
Oh, okay.
So he was slated to be the leader of that. And the day he was supposed to take over was the day that we were sitting down, and we had mail call. And so Wild, or Lieutenant Wild says, after mail call, he says, would anybody you fellas want to volunteer for to lead the 90th Division? They were short of men, and I guess they'd been hurt quite a bit, and so there wasn't anybody volunteered. And he says, now, for you privates, the Act of Congress ordered to make you PFC, and $4, and so about that time everybody hollered, $4, where are you going to spend it?
Yeah.
So then when from there on, why we was just taking care of a lot of stragglers, and the defense line that I think had already been set up, and then along about the 26th of June, the day before, we made an attack on Preto and cleaned it out, come back and set up. And then I think it was the next day that we were supposed to fall a fake attack, and there was 3 of us in the corner with bazooka man, 2 of us were bazooka carriers, and then we had an extra one there, and finally I happened to be in the middle. Here comes the mortar shell over, and took care of me. So that was, and then
You got hit with?
yeah, and hit in the thigh, and Lieutenant Grabby was hit in the chest by a bullet, and he and I went back to the field hospital. So that's from there. I spent the time in field hospital a little while, cleaned me up.
Pretty painful injury. Do you remember?
Well, not so much really, but I couldn't walk on it. And then they went through the evacuation hospital and then over to the general hospital, 186th General. There they operated and cleaned me up, and it wasn't about maybe a week or two after that why I had a blood clot, and so that took care of me for a while, because I didn't get back until in the first part of December.
Well, almost 6 months.
Yeah.
In the hospital.
And,
wow.
And it just took a long time to get the thing. I couldn't hang it over the bed and hold it there for very long, because it just kind of ballooned, and so finally they got me to exercise and hang it over and let it level the bed, and then raise it, and keep it doing that until I could finally get it so I could even go to the John.
Wow.
But then, so finally I got back to the unit on around December, 1st of December, and then they hauled us up in trucks into the Bulge and start a new. I'd missed the Holland jump, and so they trucked us all up there and that. And where our group had about 16 miles from the Grays down to where Terramont Hill was the tail end of it, of our deal. And so then in January the 7th, everybody was on an attack alert. And so that when we started out, I started out with G Company then, and was then January 7th. We started out with 105 men and wound up with 33. And that's when they had 388 sitting up there and taking care of us, and a couple tanks running back and forth. And so we managed to get between them, and then the 88 that got loose and is the one that I have a piece of shrapnel in that testament.
Well, now, for those that will view this tape, an 88 was a German, initially an artillery gun that they just turned down, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was
Yeah, the
vicious gun, right?
Yeah, the 88 was an anti-aircraft too, and so when that thing cut loose, why, it kind of knocks you silly a little bit, but get up and go on, and then the get up there closer, why one of the machine gunners was putting fire into it to the left side of it, and here this thing is pointing at you, and you kind of wonder whether he's going to fire it or not, and so you're watching it, and so I thought, well, since he's going to the left side of it, I'd go to the right, and when I did, why that's when it hit the ground right on the right side of it, why it blew up its breech, and the guys run, and Marvin Risness runs around there and gets them, captures them. I think there were about 6 of them, and so then next morning we were pulled back to Chevron, and we stayed there, and I went on Mayo on sick call, whatever you call it. Doctor looked at my feet and he said, "That's enough for you," and so that's when I went back and went to Paris, and that's when they had a whole bunch of people lying there on the cots, and their toes sticking up, they're all black. And I said, I just can't handle this. And so he sends me over to Verdun, and I didn't have to get dressed there other than just for every day, and I was just more or less passing time there. They couldn't help me out any, but so they placed me in the 713th MP, and from there, we kept following the front line until May, and until the war was over. Then you went on up to Berlin, and we was crossing the Elba River at Dresden, and they didn't have the bridge there finished. So when that was, they put me over there, I was to hold the Russians from coming and piling up and clogging up the runway there. That it's part of the Autobahn. So I think when they finished it, then we got on up to Berlin, and of course we were stalled several times with Russians checking us out, and we did.
So you actually linked up with the Russians then?
Well, that's where we were in their sector then. We moved up to Berlin, because he had the British and the three sections, and so we weren't doing much of anything. Of course, I couldn't get along too well with people for some reason or other, and so they put a sergeant with me. And every time he and I were always together, Sergeant McTaggart. Well, this went on until they had the Potsdam Conference. Well, then they had, I don't know how many days there, but we were guarding the back end of the Harry Truman's home. Well, when conference was over with, they had Stalin out on the back porch, and Harry Truman and Attlee. Attlee was one from Britain at that time. Churchill. I always wondered, well, what was wrong with Churchill and why they voted him out? Well, and but from there, it was long about December. I don't know. Probably a few days after the 1st of December, we had enough points to get out, and so they started sending us back to Le Havre and on the boat, ship rather, you don't call them boat. And so that's when one of the guys on the sailors, or one of the, I don't know what rank he had, but he come around, he says, we need some volunteers and everybody said, well, I'm not volunteering. There's only about 20 of us. And I said, oh, it wouldn't hurt to volunteer one more time. And I talked them into it. And so we had a room by ourselves, and they said, well, we won't call on you because you're going to probably be sick by the time you get there. And some of them were, but I'd managed to keep from getting sick. From then on, you spend about 15 days on the Marine and Merchant Mariner says, oh, that's about the worst time for them because there were several of them got sick. Kind of unusual. Is that rough? And so then when we hit New York, immediately they sent some of us down to Camp Chaffee, Arkansas, and from there, I was discharged and made it home.
Well, if you don't mind, let me pepper you with some questions,
Yeah.
and we'll talk a little bit past that. What were conditions like? Well, you were in various situations, but as far as sleeping and you're out in the open. You're, as far as sleeping, and how was the food? I mean, how did you physically function, and particularly when you're in the Bulge, when it was
Yeah.
the hardest winter in one of Europe's history? Talk a little bit about conditions and how you managed in something like that.
Well, it makes you wonder because we didn't have clothes that would keep you warm like you do today.
Right.
You had that overcoat, and it was so heavy that, and when you're walking, you're going to sweat because you got too much on, you got too much weight, and carrying a bazooka and extra rounds, and when that snow is at least 18 inches deep or maybe 2 feet in some places, and then you got zero weather. Well, the main thing is you try to change your socks, and you don't dare take your clothes off. You got to sleep with everything on, and you got to be prepared. So you try to get a dry sock on, and then you can take and put it in your back pocket, and it dry out. And change the other one later, and you just your C rations or K rations, and when it come Christmas Day up there, I forgot to say that about it. They brought that up. I think the first day they got there with the potatoes and mashed potatoes and gravy. Next day the turkey come along. Either vice versa, I can't. But it was kind of funny. Everybody made a kind of a humor out of that. But that's the only hot meal I could remember even getting a partial meal.
Wow. Wow.
And there's other people that had to, that had to stick it out until, I don't know for sure what happened to our platoon after, that's about all we had left was 33, and then I left, that's 32, and I don't think they were in there until February, I think 31st, something like that.
Hmm. Well, looking back on it now, how do you think you managed? How did you function? I mean, not only are you in terrible physical conditions, but you've got the stress of war hanging over you. How do you think you function day to day? How do you think you made it?
I guess just brute force or something, or your determination, and of course, I don't know for sure how they got the wounded out of there. You had to pass them up, and you didn't think much about it. I guess you do, but you don't let it bother you. Of course, when you're in one of those overcoats and going up on snow, hey, they can't help but see you.
Wow.
And of course, they were the same way. That some of their outfits would keep running towards you, and just like it, you can't imagine what goes in their mind if they were brainwashed that much.
Yeah. Yeah. What's it like? I don't know, as best you can explain it for people like myself or others that will watch this that have never been in battle, to be in the heat of battle like that. What are you thinking? What's going through your mind?
Well, you're trying to. I don't know exactly what goes through your mind, but you're trained to. You have a license, and so you kind of pass it off, and what else can you do? It's kind of like one of our doctors one time. We were sitting around kind of talking, and he says, "What you remember the first time you had to kill somebody?" And some of them, I don't remember how many were there, about maybe 10 of us or something. And a few of them says, well, you, yeah, you can remember, but you pass it off somewhere or other. And I said, well, I think I've put it out of my mind. I don't remember it. And he had some remark about, right, whatever you had to do,
Yeah, yeah,
put it out of your mind.
yeah, yeah. Well, what about being on the other end of that, though? Being, knowing the fact that you're a target, or you've been in a barrage. I mean, how did you deal with that aspect of it?
Well, you're watching the terrain pretty close, and of course, when you're young, your eyesight's pretty good, and you just hope that you can outsmart the other guy. And I kind of think like, well, maybe it's good that I went where I did, because they're some of your ancestors, and maybe they think like you do. If you do, well, you can outsmart it, but you can't always really. And but you work together and make sure somebody's looking, watching your rear and your right flank and left. And when you're carrying a bazooka, you're out on the front, so you're.
Like I said, I just couldn't imagine staring down an 88 and what's going through your mind and.
Yeah, I looked at that thing afterwards and I said, it wouldn't have taken many more shells, and they'd cleaned us out. And you look at it and you say, well, why not? I mean, what possessed them not to? The shells were laying there. When I went by it, I looked, and sure enough, there were several. And I'd have got my wish if we could have kind of captured it, because that night, we had a tank that came in about 5 o'clock or sometime in that, and he fired 2 shots at that tank out in front where we come across. And one of them hit in front of him, and the other hit to the left side, and so that was all that was fired. So along about midnight, we hear this thing kind of eased out, backed out, got on the road, and didn't take off very fast, that if we could have used the 880 on them, it'd have. But there again, they blew the breach. And why they didn't shoot more at us, I don't know.
Huh.
It's one of those things that, what if?
Yeah. I was wondering if you could hold this up and explain this story about what happened, the story with that too as well.
Yeah. This was on Hill 30, or not Hill 30, but Turdemont Hill. And when we was facing the 88, and it fired, and I got a piece of it, and Lieutenant Fowler was hit and took a leg off. And so that's, this is on January the 7th. And it went a little more than halfway through imprint.
And you had that was in your chest pocket, correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So that's,
What were, as you were going through battles in France and Holland and Berlin, can you describe the terrain as far as what the towns look like and conditions and such as?
It's really, you go over there now and it's beautiful country. Everything's green, and you go into France, there's things, in Normandy hasn't changed much. It's kind of like you got electric line or high line, well, it goes from one house to the other. We don't have that, but kind of like that. And then they have some sheep that clean or mows the yard. And it's still got just like it was back in that day. And when you get into the Bulge, everything's green, cleaned up. There's no.
What were you seeing though as you were traveling through these total devastation with the towns and such, or was
They were. You take Belgium, you know, in their case, it's been run over twice. And it wasn't too long since World War One, and now their wheat and their hay is just beautiful, and it's fantastic. What you say? What? Of course, I can maybe see why somebody wanted to take over and get their territory, and in Holland is the same way, and of course now everything is cleaned up, you know. But again, Will here a while back, a friend of mine, when we went to Berlin, and you see when you're going through Holland and the eastern or the western part of Germany, going up to Berlin, it's the crops are nice and their cattle, and we went up there just shortly after the Berlin Wall was torn down, and it was amazing how much. Of course, I spent about 6 months up there, well, for at least 5 anyway, after the war. And when you look at it from that time and what it was now, why part of it was cleaned up, but where the wall was, it's nothing but bullet marks. And now I think they have it all cleaned up, but they were still spoils of war.
But Berlin must have been in shambles when you first went up there.
It was.
Yeah, and so you stayed on as part of the occupation force then after after the war ended.
Yeah, until they started sending people.
So you got your points
by points.
Yeah.
Yeah, that when I first went in, why there was nothing but carts, bicycles. Now you see probably 1 million people on the street, 2 million in the little outer skirt, maybe outside of the wall or the border you see maybe 3 million or 4 million people.
Yeah.
And what it looked to me like that when you think about it, it could be a World Trade Center from the water inlet, what's going on, and the recovery is fascinating.
Yeah. Did you have, as you were moving through Europe, did you have much interaction with the locals at all?
Oh,
or
yeah.
And how did you find them, particularly when you got into Germany and you were in?
I never had any problems, and I had close contact with being with the MP, and then in the fighting area too. Well, I have 45 days or something frontline duty, and then the rest of it is in the hospital
Yeah.
in Berlin, and I didn't have any trouble. The only trouble I saw that was during the Potsdam Conference was there were people that were agitators. They wanted you to join the Americans, take care of Russia. And when you think about that and you say, well, when I'm standing back there, go down there every morning behind Harry Truman's and raise the flag in the morning.
So you were actually at Potsdam?
Right.
Right. Wow. Fascinating.
They had the lake there, and all those, Davies's home was next to Truman's, and one of my friends was always parked in between those, checking people, and I was on behind that, and Sergeant McTaggart and I was raising the flag in the morning, and when they come out there on the porch after all the conference was over with, why, it might have been, if I had any bad notions, it had been a time right there you could take Stalin out if you wanted to start a third war.
Wow, wow.
But there wasn't any thought anybody
Yeah,
thinking.
yeah.
But you did run into the German people with a notion to want to join. And this was very obvious what in a number of places that they were willing to lay their arms down and walk across the line. But it'd have been kind of sad if they really, I don't know how you could have survived a war, really.
Do you remember where you were when VE Day was announced, and the feeling you had that, hey, I survived this thing?
Yeah, I think, you know, when Roosevelt died, and you got to thinking, well, you know, what's it for me, you know? And then when you saw Harry Truman working and kind of give you an uplift, because I think he knew and he had a lot on his mind when it come to whether to drop the bomb or whether it's going to work, whether it's going to ignite. So.
How was communications back and forth to home, as far as, did you get mail regularly to?
Yeah, I was always writing a letter. Not much sense to it. Charlyne was writing too.
So Charlyne, you were
Yeah.
keeping in good touch. How reliable was that? Was it? Were you getting it pretty regularly, particularly since you're moving around?
It got to where there's about 3 days would do it.
Really? Yeah.
And it's amazing how much our air travel was for transportation then. And I was fascinated by it. Sent it airmail, put a stamp on it. And of course, it was free but if you do that, well, they paying for your way.
Did Charlyne ever, after the war, ever talk about what she was feeling, knowing that you were in harm's way, and particularly when she heard news that you'd been injured Charlyne, Warren and I were talking about communications back and forth to home, and one of my questions was what you were feeling from that on the home front, particularly knowing that Warren was in, well, really probably didn't know where he was in particular, that he was in harm's way, and then I imagine you got word that he'd been injured, and what were you feeling, and what were your thoughts from your angle?
Well, on D-Day morning, I was in summer school at college, Sterling College, and all the sirens and bells and whistles in the town began whistling about 7 in the morning. And we were afraid the town was on fire. We were sleeping in the basement of a dorm, and we got to our, no, it was before 7, because we went to a 7 o'clock class, and the professor said, "This is D-Day." It had happened. So I knew he had jumped, you know, that he was, and I didn't hear anything until the end of June. And all the kids from our little town of Abbeville came up to Sterling, and we had a picnic at the lake. And one of the girls there knew he had been injured. And she just told me very glibly and flipped, you know, that he was hit, and that was all we knew.
Oh boy.
And I do not remember when I found out how badly he was injured or anything else. He wasn't good at letter writing.
No.
He can tell that.
Do you remember, then did he eventually write you and tell you, bring you up to date on
Right.
and everything?
From
And
the hospital after he got clear back up to England.
wow, but that's a good chunk of time. It wasn't
Yes.
like an email that you found out.
Right.
There was probably many days of uncertainty, I would imagine.
Right, a long time, and I had to keep my mind on the schoolwork to get through it.
Ask you about those visits when you had those leaves back and you'd stop in to see her and
Yeah, that's why I told him about the one that when we were,
The train would actually stop in Abbeville, 100 people. We still had a depot then, and let him off there. They sure wouldn't do that today. The Amtrak wouldn't.
and that's when her mom said, "Oh, him again?" She had to worry about her daughter.
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But we always got along all right, so no problem.
Now, did you guys, were you promised each other when you went off to war, or was it still just a casual
Just-
relation?
yeah.
Okay, okay.
I got a diamond 3 days after he got home.
Is that right? Yeah.
But I think he was afraid he wouldn't come home in one piece or something. I dated some others while he was gone, but just simply to have something to do.
Uh-huh.
No binding ties there.
Right, right. And then how long after you got engaged then did you guys marry?
He got home on Christmas Day. I got my ring about a week later, and we were married the 8th of August.
Wow.
I wouldn't marry him till he got a job. He didn't have a job till then. He got a job
Got a job and then married.
third week in July, and we got married the 8th of August.
Oh, that,
And he stayed there 33 years, so it was worth it.
you know, I worked for an optical company, and I worked 34 years and 34 and a half years, and the shop foreman died, and I kind of had to take over and do the main part and do check out, and then it finally got to the point where it kind of, they were kind of cutting corners, and then they asked me to do some maintenance on it, and I couldn't see how I could put out quality work, and because I was using my noon hour and after work, and to keep ahead of some of the stuff that you could save, and so finally they asked me to do it, and I didn't say yes or no. I just said, well, that looks like they're not going to keep up with one-day service at that time that was coming in, and they weren't going to add equipment, and the equipment had been there, well, some of it had been there almost as long as I was. Of course, the company started in August of July, I think, July of 46, and I started in August of 46, and it just didn't look like they were going to keep up, so I says, well, I got something else I want to do, and that's when I went into farm service, rebuilding diesel engines, and it wasn't long till I got in contact with the instructor at junior college, the ag department, and we were doing some work together on jobs that he hadn't had, and some of that problems he'd take the class, and finally they wouldn't let him have 3 hours, and he wanted to know if I'd take it, and so, well, I could take it without a resume, and the higher up said fine, and so I did that 3 years, and I said, well, I can't motivate these, I'm not trained like I should be, and so from then on, I was replaced, and they started a advisory board. So with all the dealerships and extra people that they could get, and And we weren't too much of a force, but we were there trying to keep the program going, and it's still going, and it's doing a little better. And so
So you're on the advisory board there at the junior college?
it's on a strictly for the agri department, and we put in our 2 cents worth, and the president, maybe you don't want to put that on her, but the president doesn't like, there's too much, it takes too much money to keep it going, because you can't handle any more than about 16 students. And so anyway, that's but it's working out better now. They're going to hire another teacher.
Are you still involved with that to this day?
Involved.
Is that right? Yeah.
And I keep saying, well, I need to get away. But we're pretty good friends with the instructors of the both departments in agriculture, and they have some good programs, really.
Yeah.
And they're trying to keep up with GPS and just a number of things that's coming up new. And I don't try to work on the new tractors. It's something you got to have an extra equipment.
Yeah. Right. Well, if I got my math correct, you guys are coming up on 63 years of marriage?
63. It will be in August.
In August. I'll be darned.
Hey, is that possible?
And children, grandchildren?
We had 4 children, 2 boys and then 2 girls. Our oldest son died at age 38.
Mm.
And our next one lives out on the farm where I grew up. And he has 2 kids, sophomore in high school and 7th grader, boy and girl. And our oldest daughter, which was number 3, lives in Boston. She's married to a neurosurgeon. She just got her doctorate, and so she's working in social work. And our youngest one lives in part of Kansas City, and she teaches high school home ec. She's married and has 3 children. So we have 7 grandchildren.
7?
No grades.
Wonder why.
The daughter in Boston has 2, and Judy has 3, and Brad has 2.
Mm.
So.
But it's
Well, Warren, we'll start to wind down this interview. Is there anything that I left out that we didn't talk about, that I forgot to ask you about, or any stories you left out you wanted to round out this interview with, that you can think of that we didn't talk about that you'd like to?
you got some stories that I tried to remember the deal on Christmas dinner, and I thought maybe you could remember that a little better than I.
Christmas dinner.
Yeah, in the Bulge. And who was it Okie Mills that was?
Yeah, he told the story. You should have been able to tell it, but he told it at a Okie, a friend of his, he told it at a reunion right after Desert Storm. You remember they were gone 3 months, but it was over Christmas, and they were making the biggest deal about these guys missing Christmas. And Okie said, "Let me tell you, my first Christmas in the Army, I was halfway through boot training. They wouldn't let us go home because we'd forget all we'd learned. I missed my first Christmas, and nobody in the U.S. cared except my mother. The second year, they had all their training. They were paratroopers. They were sitting on the East Coast waiting for a ship that was zigzagging away from the Nazi submarines. And they couldn't let them go home because the ship might come. And the third Christmas, he said, well, you know, we were together in hip deep snow up in the Bulge. We hadn't eaten anything for a day and a half. And on Christmas Eve night, the trucks caught up with us with mashed potatoes and gravy, and it was in 10-gallon cream cans. By noon the next day, the turkey and the dressing caught up. And we had Christmas dinner on 2 parts. He says, and these guys missed Christmas. You know, it makes me tired.
You'd have to know, okay, he's from
He's from the South, and it was
what,
funny the way he
North
told it.
Carolina, someplace up there, and he was a sheriff for a number of years. Evidently, he was well liked because he did it for quite a while, and it's kind of funny to see some of those guys now and what they cut up with and what they say, but there's a lot of that's what helped a little bit when he was on the end of doing the bartending. You could always kind of load it up a little bit and get them talking. Oh, that's devious. So,
And your unit, you guys have kept in touch over the years and had a number of reunions and
Not
get-togethers?
over the years,
Yeah.
not until just the last 15 or 20.
Is that right?
When
Yeah.
he found them. They'd been
Yeah.
getting together ones in the East, but he
you know,
was-
the first one was 84, and it was up in Omaha, Nebraska. When got in, I didn't know whether I was going to cut out some of the nonsense, but I didn't know for sure whether that was the same group. Well, I kind of.
This is the 508 you're talking about
Right.
now? Okay.
So I'm going, and I called, and they said they didn't have any room. And I said, well, I'll just bring my sleeping bag, and you put me up on the roof. And I called it something else, and he says, oh, you one of those guys? And I said, yeah, I think I am. So anyway, and there's a number of them that I knew, and when the banquet come around, why it's usually a 3-day deal, banquet on a Saturday night. So someone said, well, there's Mendez over there. So I go over and talk to him, and he calls me by my first name, and I said, you know, what a memory. And, but that always made good relations from there on out. I think there was a total of 40 some reunions all over the United States, and it made it nice for a vacation because you could take in trips from there.
we made some good friends.
Mm.
Great people.
You know that when you saw them, of course, that before the war, before D-Day, their idea is to do the work, get to town, get a beer or two, but there's always a lot of devious things that went on in that group, and it was, some people didn't like Mendez, but I kind of looked at it as, well, you know, he went through a struggle to get through West Point, as well as getting through the Airborne. And kind of a,
You'd mentioned before we sat down for this interview that on, I don't know, it was one of the anniversaries or one of the get-togethers, you actually jumped again. Can you talk a little bit about that?
this is an organization created out on the West Coast by Mandick and some other guys, Richard Mandick, and so I heard about it, and then they had stipulation being in good health, and so I went ahead and had a physical, made the 2 jumps, and then asked them if that would qualify, and it did. And so, let's see, I was 71 then, and so that's what it wound up. We made 2 more jumps out there, and they kind of had a picnic and got a send off. And then after the jump over Normandy, why, we didn't really have the authority yet, really. And so when they had the meeting with the President Clinton, and then I was in there on that deal, and then when they give a speech and all the countries were talking about it, well, then afterwards, why, I was over at the Coville at the cemetery, and I was standing there waiting for the colors to be placed, and pretty soon when it was over with, there was 2 guys. One of them was dressed in uniform and the other in plain clothes, and so they saw me and came over and shook hands, and I finally I said, well, who am I talking to? And he said, the other was a colonel, and he said, well, General Kipleiter. So I said, well, thank you for letting us go. And he says, well, you guys would have went anyway, and which would have probably, but they really, Kipleiter was the one that asked Clinton, that says, so what are we going to do with these guys? And he said, well, let them jump. So that was kind of the story there, and it turned out nice, I think. Well, one guy got hurt a little bit, but it was a little problem because we had 30-knot wind, and that's a no wind jumping, and the pilot, Don Brooks at Atlanta, he said, I'm not hearing anything on the radio, and which meant that you guys want to go, yeah, do it anyway. And so that they just went up a little higher, about 400 feet, and the first bunch went. One of them was about 2.5 miles from there. he just wasn't active enough to conscious of how to handle that chute really in a wind, and I wasn't too good at it, but anyway, I was on the jump field, and that jump field was the one we landed in the 508 in D-Day. So it kind of
He was about a mile from where he landed.
I'll be darned.
Combat.
So on a skirmish, kind of running around seeing what's going on, and we was on a mission, but we didn't have any problems, and so then come back, sit down. Lieutenant Wild says, well, sergeants, you take 5 men and go check this place out. And the day before where they went, I've been there, and so Wild was looking down at me, and I said, I just got back, or I did to myself. I said, with the bazooka team, and I don't think you want to split that up, but that's my thought. So I didn't say anything, and I just hesitated. And finally, Walter Matheson volunteered, and so I kind of relaxed a little bit. And about an hour later, they said, well, he's dead. And so then we immediately got up and was going to help see what we could do. And when I discovered that we was at the place I knew about, and so what they did was a no-no, and it always felt bad about it because they cut across in front of a hedgerow, and they shouldn't have done that. And they have high dirt piled up for tree rows, and this one, particular one, was, well, a little more than 6 feet high, and you had good coverage on, and they went across the other way, and so that's what happened there. And I always felt like, hey, it's probably one of my mistakes. You know.
In what sense? Had you gone, you would have known better than
Yeah, I wouldn't have went across, and I'd have protected them, because even if they did, I wouldn't have went that way, because I'd have went up and I used it the same place before. I knew the area, and it was just something that, well, and it's the same way for Lee Atherton there. He and I were together in Normandy long until I was hit, but I always felt like maybe he was always uneasy. Well, when you kind of work in pairs, you can protect each other a little better, and I think that's, of course, up there in that area, the way I understand it, you were going against seasoned troops, and you were right in amongst the hardcore.
Yeah.
And but how do you it's just one of those things that a couple of things there that you thought you should have been there.
Yeah. Were you able to, once you came home and moved on with your life, were you able to put these thoughts behind you? Or did you still have, today they talk about post-traumatic stress. Do you think you were affected by any of that? Were you able to?
No, Charlyne says, how come you never did say anything about it? See, went to the '84 reunion, and so we kind of got to talking about it, and first thing you know, then she couldn't make the next reunion, but she made the next one after that, and she got talking with the people and said, the other guys they don't talk about it. Mm-hmm. And that's what she didn't know anything about what went on till it was after she went to one of those, and so that's well, you got a job, and if you got talking about it, somebody'd think you'd bragging, in a way, and one time when I was in Berlin, Art Stanlow and I he was the one that came out of the Canadian Rangers. That's a Canadian and American deal, so they're kind of a rough bunch too, but anyway, he had a heart problem and was with me in Berlin, and we was sitting at the table with Sergeant McTaggart, and I don't know, they got to talking about it, and he said it kind of got a heated argument, and so Art says, well, what did you do? And this was kind of a wrong thing to do. I kind of frowned on it, and he popped off and he says, well, I killed 8, there's 5 Germans. He said, what did you do? And I said, Art, that's enough of that. I said, it just wasn't kosher, and I think that's kind of a lot of them felt, hey, you did your job, forget it, let's go.
Yeah. How about physically, as far as your injury or your frostbite feet? Have you ever had any issues with that after the war? Or?
Yeah, I do. the one, my leg is, they, I think they let me go too long. And the thing was, the knee was bent, I couldn't get it straight. And I don't know, maybe about a couple of weeks after, that thing had a blood clot.
Yeah.
And there was a lieutenant in the bed next to me, and I said, if you got your 45, get rid of me, because that hurts so bad that so what does the doctor do? He comes in, I think he must have got a hold of him some way or other, the lieutenant there. So when the doctor come in, and he says, get a hold of the head of the bed. And so I knew what was coming, and you knew he's going to find out whether you're faking. Well, he put his foot on the bed and grabbed my leg and started pulling that thing, trying to straighten it out. And it finally give a little bit, but the bed, those iron rails bent them. And I said, you can go ahead and bend those things you want to. I'll hang on. And that's what it broke loose, and so then they went in and changed the circulation around, and they cut a slit in there in my leg about that long, and tied something together, and so then they were able to get the circulation to go on. They packed the thing in ice, and then kind of helped me along. They give me some Scotch whiskey and back there, and then that's probably the best thing. But you don't have the feeling, and one of the guys in our outfit, he frosted his feet pretty bad, and so he said, Warren, what do you do when you go to bed at night? I said, I don't. He said, you wear socks? And I said, no, but I got the question, and he says, well, yeah, that's what he does, and you get a feeling that you got a nerve damage or something along with it, and it just drives you dingy until you get to sleep. So I tried it, and it works, I get a little better sleep when you wear your socks to bed.
Wow. Wow.
It's just crazy, but it worked for him, and I had no idea but afterwards, why finally my leg started breaking out and it swelled up, and so they used elastic all the way up from the toe to the hip, and I kind of finally it got to where I could keep it from breaking out, and that was the main thing. And so then wearing, even I've got one on now to keep the swelling down for it.
To this day.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, you just keep a watching, and you just don't let it get breaking out. Kind of like, not bursitis, it's what do they call it when your liquid or the fluid keeps from breaking out and you get ulcers or something. It kind of, I don't know, there's a name for it, but
Yeah.
but I was able to get through, and then finally got to where I could sit down most of the time, and that helped. And then you got a little older, when I was working for myself, you could always take a break when you wanted to and kind of get by. But it's,
Well, we'll wind down this this interview. One question I always like to, last question I usually like to end off with is, how do you think your war experience, that experience, affected your life, changed your life, played a part in your life, or was it just simply a chapter you went through and moved on?
I think it was an experience that helps you for the future. I don't know, the training we had, there was, hey, you do it, you get it done. And when you go to tackle something, like, go ahead and do it. And it might cause you a little trouble, but I think for me, I could fit in by not having a family, growing up in a family. I could fit in with the Army, and I would have probably stayed in if I hadn't been hurt. And because I could, it's kind of like one of those things they used to say. So and so found a home in the Army. Well, I really did, because I didn't have a home. And when you take a lot of crap from people, and maybe they don't mean to, but when you're an outsider, why, that's a different story, and I could, not to compensate for it, but or live with it better than most of them. And I think that's why, when it comes to that training that they give us, it didn't matter to me. I could, it's just part of it. And when the doctor got a hold of my leg, I said, yeah, I see what he's doing. I can tell what he had to find out. And whether you're, so, there's things that I don't let bother me. And I wonder about today on a lot of those, what is this, STTB, something like that. And when we went in, we knew where our enemy was. And like I was saying, you could relate to the people that come out of Europe, and maybe outsmart them, I don't know, but anyway, I thought that was the way of, I could get by and understand it a little better. But now, when the media tries to build some of these court-martials or tell them about them, and what are we doing here? When you're when you're in out, especially now, you don't know where your enemy's at, and civilian makes the wrong move. Hey, and the same thing, if that sort of thing happened to one of my friends that was in Kansas City that we took training with, he said, I wasn't ashamed of anything that I did, except for one time Frenchman coming running out the back door, and he let him have it, because he said it was just, and he said he felt bad about it, but if somebody's running, hey, got a guilty conscience, or is he part of it, or is, how did you, and then we court-martial somebody for shooting a civilian. I don't know, yeah, you try not, but that's my problem with today's. The people that are hollering probably don't understand it really.
Well, Warren, I want to thank you for sitting down and taking the time to tell your story today. More importantly, though, I want to thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you. Thank you.